Emily?
Don't act like you don't know why we're here.
Emily, what are you talking about?
I finally found out what happened to my parents' money.
What?
You took it, didn't you?
Ma'am, please remain calm. We're not here to make any conclusions. We just need your cooperation.
What is this about? From who?
I told them what Linda told me.
Linda?
She said you took money that belonged to my parents.
Emily, after everything I've done for you, you actually believe that?
I don't know what to believe anymore.
Then look me in the eyes and think I betrayed you.
I think you've been lying to me for years.
Then you have no idea who I am.
That was the morning my niece brought the police to my door. And standing behind those officers was the little girl I had raised since she was 7 years old. The same child I had taken into my home after she lost both of her parents. The same girl I had fed, clothed, protected, educated, and loved for nearly 20 years. But now she was standing on my porch, looking at me as if I were a criminal. I had spent almost 2 decades believing I was Emily's safe place. I never imagined that one day she would be the person who made me afraid to open my own front door. And what she accused me of doing was something I had never done. Something that could destroy my reputation, my career, and possibly my freedom. But before I tell you how my own niece turned against me, let me take you back to where everything began. Welcome to Nenya Folk Tales, where every story teaches you about betrayal, karma, love, and life lessons. If you love emotional stories with crazy twists, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss a new story every Mon, Wed, and Sat by 8 p.m. Now, let's get into today's story. My name is Sarah, and almost 20 years before those police officers appeared at my door, I was just a 32-year-old woman living a quiet life outside Columbus, Ohio. My husband and I had always dreamed of having children, but year after year, that dream remained out of reach. Doctor appointments became normal. Treatments came and went. Hope would rise, only to disappear again. Eventually, we stopped talking about it. We accepted that maybe we were never meant to become parents. Then, one rainy evening, my younger sister called me. The moment I answered, I knew something was wrong. She was crying so hard that she could barely speak. "Sarah, there's been an accident. Her husband had been killed by a drunk driver. My sister survived, but she suffered terrible injuries. And suddenly, her 7-year-old daughter, Emily, was left trying to understand why her father wasn't coming home. I rushed to the hospital. When I found Emily, she was sitting alone in a waiting room, holding a photograph of her parents against her chest. She looked so small, so frightened. I sat beside her. She looked at me and asked the question that broke my heart. "Is Daddy coming back?" I didn't know what to say, so I pulled her into my arms, and I held her. Months later, my sister died from complications related to her injuries. Emily was now an orphan, and I was faced with a decision that would change my life forever. I could have stepped away. I could have told myself that raising a child wasn't my responsibility. Instead, I remembered the promise I had made to my sister. So I opened my home to Emily. The first night Emily slept in my house, she woke up screaming. I ran into her room and found her sitting upright, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy?" She was calling for her mother. I sat beside her and pulled the blanket around her shoulders. "I'm here, Emily." She looked at me with frightened eyes. "Where's my mummy?" I didn't know how to answer that without breaking her heart all over again, so I held her. That became my job in those early years. Whenever grief woke her up, I was there. Whenever she was afraid, I was there. Whenever she missed her parents, I listened. I took her to counseling. I attended her school meetings. I learned what foods she liked and what foods she hated. I learned which stories made her laugh and which memories made her cry. I rearranged my work schedule around her. I worked extra hours when money was tight. And slowly, Emily began to heal. Her nightmares became less frequent. She started making friends. She began laughing again. Then one afternoon, I came home from work and found her waiting for me at the door. She ran toward me and wrapped her arms around my waist. "Mom?" I froze. She had never called me that before. She pulled away and looked embarrassed. "Sorry," I smiled. "You don't have to apologize." From that day forward, I was no longer just her aunt. I became her mother, in every way that mattered. I watched her grow from a frightened little girl into a confident teenager. I was there for her first school dance, her first heartbreak, her first big exam, her graduation, every birthday, every Christmas, every difficult night when she needed someone to talk to. And I never once reminded her that I wasn't her biological mother, because to me, she was my daughter. Then my marriage fell apart. My husband told me he wanted a different life. I was devastated. After nearly 10 years of marriage, he packed his things and left. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed crying. Emily found me. She didn't ask me what happened. She simply sat beside me. Then she took my hand. "You still have me." I looked at her through my tears. She smiled. "You and me, Mom. Always." I believed her. Years passed. Emily graduated from high school near the top of her class. I was so proud of her that I cried through most of the ceremony. When she walked across that stage, all I could see was the 7-year-old girl sitting alone in that hospital waiting room. The child who had lost everything. The child I had promised to protect. I thought we had made it through the hardest part. I thought nothing could ever come between us. Then Emily went to college. At first, everything seemed normal. She called regularly. She came home for holidays. We cooked together. We watched movies. We talked about her classes and the people she was meeting. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small things. Emily became more private. She started keeping her phone face down whenever she visited. Sometimes, she would walk outside to answer calls. If I entered the room, conversations would suddenly stop. I noticed, but I didn't think too much about it. I told myself she was growing up. She was becoming independent. That was normal. Then she came home for Thanksgiving. Usually, Emily would walk through the door and immediately tell me everything that had happened at school. That year, she barely spoke. She spent most of the evening looking at her phone. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine." "You don't seem fine," she sighed. "I'm just tired, Mom." I didn't push her. I wish I had. Christmas was even stranger. We were sitting around the dining table with relatives when someone mentioned Emily's parents. It was normal in our family. We often talked about them. Usually, Emily enjoyed hearing the old stories. But this time, she suddenly became silent. Her expression changed. Then she pushed her chair back. "I need to go upstairs." I watched her leave. A few minutes later, I followed her. I knocked on her bedroom door. "Emily? I'm fine. Can I come in?" "No." Her answer was sharp. I stood there for a moment. "Okay, but if something is wrong, you can talk to me." There was no answer. I walked away feeling confused. After she returned to college, our calls became less frequent. Sometimes I would text her and get no response for days. When she finally replied, her messages were short. I tried not to take it personally, but deep down I knew something was wrong. Then one evening, Emily called me. Her first question caught me completely off guard. "Mom, did my parents leave me an inheritance?" I sat down. "What made you ask that?" "Just answer me." I paused. "Emily, you know there wasn't some huge inheritance." "How do you know?" "Because I was there. I handled everything after the accident with the lawyers." "What happened to their money?" "Emily, I just want to know." So I explained. Her parents had medical bills. There were debts. There were legal expenses. There were other costs associated with the accident and the estate. Whatever assets remained had been handled through the proper legal process. There was no secret fortune, no hidden account, no missing millions. When I finished explaining, Emily was quiet. Then she asked something that made me uncomfortable. "Are you sure?" I stared at the phone. Why wouldn't I be sure? She didn't answer. The call ended shortly afterward. A few weeks later, she called again. This time, she had more questions. How much did my parents have? What happened to their property? Who handled their accounts? Where are the documents? Who had access to the money? I answered every question I could. but the questions kept coming. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Emily, why are you asking me all of this? Silence. Then she said something that made my heart sink. Someone told me there are things you never told me. I sat completely still. Who? She hesitated. Then she said a name I hadn't heard in years. Linda. Linda was a distant relative from my late brother-in-law's side of the family. I barely knew her anymore. She had never been involved in Emily's life. She wasn't there when Emily lost her parents. She didn't help raise her. She didn't attend most of her birthdays. She wasn't there for her graduation. As far as I knew, Linda had disappeared from our lives. But apparently, she had recently reconnected with Emily online. And she had been talking. A lot. At first, I wasn't worried. I assumed they were simply catching up. But then Emily started repeating things Linda had told her. Questions about her parents. Questions about money. Questions about the accident. Questions about me. And suddenly, I understood that those questions weren't coming from nowhere. Someone was putting them in her head. Someone was making Emily question everything she thought she knew about her own childhood. And I was about to discover just how dangerous that could become. Because the next phone call from Emily wasn't about inheritance. It was an accusation. And after I heard the words that came out of her mouth, I realized the little girl I had raised for nearly 20 years might no longer trust me at all. The phone rang just after 10 that night. I almost ignored it, because I was already in bed. But when I saw Emily's name on the screen, I answered immediately. Emily? There was silence on the other end. Then I heard her breathing. Mom? Something about her voice made me sit up. What's wrong? She didn't answer. Emily, talk to me. Are you okay? Finally she spoke. Did you steal my parents' money? For a moment, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. What? Did you steal the money that belonged to my parents? My heart dropped. Emily, where is this coming from? Just answer the question. I could hear anger in her voice, but underneath that anger was something else. Suspicion. Emily, I have never stolen anything from your parents. You know that. No, I don't know that. Her words hit me harder than I expected. After everything I had done for her, after almost 20 years of raising her, she was telling me she didn't know whether she could trust me. Who told you this? She went quiet. Was it Linda? Why does it matter who told me? Because I want to understand why you suddenly believe I stole from your parents. You always say there was nothing left. Because there wasn't. Then where did the money go? I took a deep breath. Emily, the records exist. The lawyers handled everything. There were medical bills, debts, legal expenses, and other costs. Nothing was hidden from you. That's what you keep saying. I felt my eyes burning with tears. Emily, listen to yourself. I raised you. I was there when you had nightmares. I paid your school fees. I took you to the doctor. I worked extra hours so you could have what you needed. Why would I steal from you? Maybe because you knew I was too young to understand. I froze. That sentence broke something inside me. Is that really what you think of me? She didn't answer. Emily, I loved you like my own daughter. I never asked you to. The room suddenly felt silent. I couldn't speak. For years, I had dreamed of giving Emily the life her parents could no longer give her. I had never expected gratitude. I had never kept a list of what I spent. I had simply loved her. And now she was looking at all of it, through completely different eyes. Emily, I finally whispered, I don't know what Linda has been telling you, but please, don't let someone who wasn't there rewrite your childhood. You're saying she's lying? Yes. You're sure? I am absolutely sure. She breathed heavily. Then she said, I'm going to find out the truth myself. The call ended. I stared at my phone for several seconds. I wanted to call her back. I wanted to explain everything again, but something told me not to. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the same question. How could the little girl who once called me Mom now believe I was capable of stealing from her? The next morning, I went into my storage room and pulled out the old boxes containing the documents from her parents' estate. bank statements, legal filings, receipts, court documents. Everything was still there. I opened one folder after another. The records told the same story I had told Emily. There was no missing fortune, no secret account, no stolen inheritance, nothing. But as I looked through those papers, another thought entered my mind. If Emily was asking these questions now, Linda must have convinced her that there was something to find. And if Emily believed that strongly enough, she might not stop until she found someone to blame. I didn't know how right I was. 3 weeks later, Emily came to my house. I was surprised to see her. For one brief moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe she had realized she had gone too far. Maybe she wanted to apologize. But when I opened the door, I saw the folder in her hands. My hope disappeared. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. Emily walked into the kitchen and placed the folder on the table. Then she sat down. I remained standing. "What is that?" "Documents." "About what?" "My parents." I slowly sat opposite her. She opened the folder. "Where is the account my father had before the accident?" "I already told you. The estate records are there." "What about this property?" "It was sold to cover expenses." "And this payment?" "That was for medical expenses." "What about this one?" "Legal fees." She kept going, question after question, for almost 2 hours. I answered every one. Finally, I looked at her. "Emily, what exactly are you expecting to find?" She stared at me. "The truth." I swallowed. "And what if the truth isn't what you want it to be?" Her expression hardened. "Why are you afraid of me finding something?" "I'm not afraid." "Then why won't you just admit what happened?" My voice became quieter. "Because nothing happened." She slammed the folder shut. "You expect me to believe that after all these years, there was absolutely nothing left. I expect you to believe the documents." She stood up. I thought she was going to leave. Instead, she looked at me and said something I will never forget. "I don't know who you really are anymore." Then she walked out. I remained at that table long after the door closed. That night, I cried for the first time because of Emily. Not because she had accused me, but because I realized she no longer remembered me the way I remembered her. To me, she was still the 7-year-old girl who had asked if her father was coming back. To her, I was becoming the woman who had supposedly taken something from her. And somewhere between those two memories was a truth I hadn't yet discovered. Someone had spent months turning my daughter against me, and they weren't finished. A few days after Emily left my house, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. It was my old family friend, Denise. "Sarah, I need to ask you something." Her voice sounded uncomfortable. "What is it? Are you and Emily having problems?" My stomach tightened. "Why?" There was a pause. "Because I've heard some things." I sat down. "What things?" Denise hesitated before finally saying it. "Emily has been telling people that you took money that belonged to her parents." For a moment, I couldn't respond. "Who has she told?" "I'm not sure. Some relatives, a few people she knows, maybe others." I closed my eyes. The accusation was no longer staying between Emily and me. It was spreading. "Denise, I didn't take anything. I know you, Sarah. I'm not saying I believe it, but the fact that she had even called me told me something important." People were starting to hear Emily's version of the story. After we ended the call, I sat in silence. I had spent years building a reputation as a hard-working, responsible woman. Now, someone was slowly attaching the word thief to my name, and the person spreading it was the child I had raised. That evening, I opened the storage boxes again. This time, I wasn't looking through the documents for Emily. I was looking through them for myself. I needed to know that if this became something bigger, I could prove exactly what happened. I organized everything: bank statements, court records, estate documents, receipts, tax records, legal correspondence. I made copies and stored them separately. Then I called the attorney who had helped handle Emily's parents' estate years earlier. He was older now, but he remembered the case. "Mr. Harris, I need your help." "What happened?" I explained everything. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "Sarah, if everything was handled the way I remember, the records should speak for themselves. That's what I'm hoping. Keep every document. Don't throw anything away." I promised I wouldn't. I thought that would be enough. It wasn't. About 2 weeks later, Emily came to see me again. This time, she didn't come alone. Linda was with her. The moment I saw Linda standing behind Emily, I understood exactly how serious this had become. Linda smiled faintly. "Sarah." I didn't return the smile. "Linda." Emily walked inside. Linda followed. I closed the door. We sat in the living room. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Linda placed a folder on the coffee table. "We just want answers," she said. I looked at her. "You weren't there when Emily's parents died." Linda's expression changed. "That doesn't mean I don't care about what happened." "You weren't there when Emily was in the hospital." Silence. "You weren't there when my sister died." Linda shifted in her seat. "And you weren't there when I raised Emily." Emily suddenly interrupted. "That's enough." I looked at her. She wasn't defending me. She was defending Linda. That hurt more than I expected. Emily opened the folder. "There are still questions." "Then ask them." She started reading from a list. Every question was about money. Every question came back to the same accusation. And every answer I gave was supported by documents. Finally, Linda leaned forward. "Sarah, if you have nothing to hide, why are you getting defensive?" I stared at her. "I am not defensive. I am exhausted. Maybe you're exhausted because you've been carrying a secret for years." My heart began pounding. "Linda, be careful." Emily looked between us. "Mom, just answer her." I turned toward Emily. "Answer what? Whether I stole money that never existed?" Linda immediately said, "That's your version." I stood up. "No, that's the documented version." I walked to the cabinet and pulled out one of the folders. I placed it on the table. "Here, read it." Linda didn't touch it. I opened another, and this one, then another. "Read everything." Emily stared at the documents. I could see uncertainty in her face for the first time. But Linda noticed it too. She quickly said, "Documents can be manipulated." I looked at her. "Are you accusing me of falsifying legal records?" She didn't answer. Emily suddenly stood. "I'm leaving." "Emily." She stopped at the door. I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to beg her to remember everything we had been through. Instead, I simply said, "I never betrayed you." She didn't turn around. Linda followed her outside. I watched them walk away through the window. That night, I realized something terrifying. Linda wasn't simply telling Emily a story. She was protecting that story. And if the evidence contradicted it, she was prepared to make the evidence look suspicious too. The following week, things got worse. I received a letter from an attorney. It requested financial records connected to Emily's parents' estate. I read the letter twice. Then a third time. My hands began shaking. This was no longer just a family argument. Emily had officially started looking into the matter. I immediately contacted my own attorney. He told me not to panic. "Sarah, if your records are clean, cooperate through the proper channels. I have nothing to hide." "Good. Then let the documents speak." So I did. I gave them everything. The bank statements, the receipts, the court records, the estate documents. Every piece of evidence I had. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something much bigger was happening. Because if Emily was willing to take this far, someone had convinced her that she had been robbed. And that person wasn't going to stop easily. Then, one evening, I received a message from Emily. It contained only one sentence. "I'm going to find out what you did." I stared at the screen. My hands went cold. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I put my phone down. I realized there was nothing I could say that would convince her. She didn't want my explanation anymore. She wanted proof. And I was about to discover that even proof might not be enough. Because less than a month later, someone knocked on my door. And this time, when I opened it, I wasn't looking at Emily. I was looking at two people who had come because of the accusation she had made against me. The knock came just after 8 in the morning. I had barely finished making my coffee when I heard it. 3 firm knocks. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, 2 police officers were standing on my porch. My heart immediately started racing. Then I saw Emily. She was standing several feet behind them. For a moment, I couldn't move. Emily? She looked at me, but there was no warmth in her eyes. One of the officers stepped forward. "Are you Sarah Williams?" "Yes. We need to speak with you about a financial complaint that has been filed." My stomach dropped. "A complaint?" The officer nodded. Emily remained silent behind him. I looked at her. "Emily, what is this?" She looked away. The officer explained that allegations had been made concerning money connected to her parents' estate and the years I had been responsible for her care. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. "I didn't steal anything," I said. The officer remained calm. "We're not saying you did. We're conducting an investigation and need your cooperation." I stepped aside and allowed them to come in. As they entered my home, I looked at Emily again. This was the same girl who had once slept in the bedroom upstairs. The same girl whose school fees I had paid. The same girl whose birthdays I had celebrated. The same girl who had once called me Mum. And now she had brought the police to my door. I sat down while the officers asked questions. Where were the financial records? Who had managed her parents' estate? What happened to the assets? Did I have access to any accounts? I answered everything, but with every question, I felt more humiliated. Finally, one officer said, "Miss Sarah, at this point, you are not being arrested. We simply need the relevant records. I'll give you everything." The officers thanked me and left. Emily remained outside. For one brief moment, I thought she might come inside. She didn't. She simply looked at me. Then she turned and walked away. I closed the door. The investigation began immediately. I gathered every document I had: bank statements, estate records, court filings, receipts, tax documents, everything. I gave investigators exactly what they requested. I had nothing to hide. But innocence didn't make the situation easy. People began talking. Neighbors who had known me for years suddenly looked at me differently. A few acquaintances stopped calling. Someone at work asked whether the rumors were true. I felt as though my entire life was being examined by people who knew nothing about it. And through all of it, one question kept haunting me. Why would Emily believe this? I had raised her since she was 7. I had watched her grow up. I had sacrificed for her. How could she look at me now and see a thief? Then, about 3 months into the investigation, an investigator called me. "Sarah, we need you to come in." His voice sounded different, more serious than before. I went to the office the next morning. The investigator placed several documents on the desk. We found some inconsistencies. I stared at him. Inconsistencies? He nodded. Some of the information provided to us doesn't match the records. My heart started beating faster. What information? He paused. Some of the claims Emily made. I said nothing. Then he mentioned Linda. The moment I heard her name, everything suddenly made sense. The investigator asked me how I knew her. I told him everything. How Linda had reconnected with Emily. How the questions about money had started afterward. How every accusation seemed to come from conversations Emily had with her. The investigator listened carefully. Then he asked something that shocked me. Did Linda ever have access to financial information connected to Emily? No. Did she ever attempt to obtain any? I thought for a moment. I don't know. He wrote something down. Then he looked at me. We're going to look into that. For the first time since the police had appeared at my door, I felt a tiny sense of hope. Maybe the truth was finally beginning to surface. But I had no idea how much worse things were about to become. Because the investigators didn't just discover that Linda had been influencing Emily. They discovered that Linda had been telling Emily a story that was almost entirely false. And hidden inside that story was something I never expected. A motive. A reason why Linda had spent so much time convincing Emily that I had stolen her parents' money. And once investigators uncovered it, the entire case began turning upside down. For the first time since the investigation began, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The investigator explained that several details in Emily's statement did not match the financial records. Some dates were wrong, some claims could not be supported, and most importantly, several of the accusations appeared to have come from the same person, Linda. The name made my stomach tighten. I told the investigator everything I knew about her involvement. I explained how she had reappeared in Emily's life, how the questions about the inheritance had started after their conversations, and how every accusation seemed to trace back to something Linda had told Emily. The investigator listened carefully. Then he asked me one question. Did Linda ever have access to any of the money or accounts connected to Emily? No, I answered immediately. She had no legal authority over anything. He wrote something down. Are you certain? Yes. That answer seemed to interest him. A few days later, he contacted me again. This time, his voice sounded different. He told me investigators had discovered communications between Linda and Emily that raised serious questions about the story Emily had been told. Linda had repeatedly claimed that Emily's parents had left behind a large amount of money, but the official records showed otherwise. There had never been the fortune Linda described. There had never been secret accounts. There had never been a missing inheritance. The money had simply never existed. Then investigators discovered something even more disturbing. Linda had been asking Emily questions about her finances and future plans. She had also been encouraging Emily to believe that I had hidden money from her. But why? That was the question nobody could answer, until investigators started looking at Linda's own financial situation. What they found changed everything. Linda had been struggling financially for years. She had debts. She had financial problems. And according to the evidence investigators uncovered, she had repeatedly discussed Emily's financial future. Suddenly, her involvement no longer looked like concern for a grieving niece. It looked like manipulation. Linda had presented herself as the person who was finally going to help Emily uncover the truth. But the truth was that she had been feeding Emily a story that didn't exist. A story about stolen money. A story about betrayal. A story that turned me into the villain. And Emily had believed it. I remember sitting in my living room after that phone call, staring at the boxes of documents that had nearly taken over my house. For months, those papers had represented fear. Now, they represented something else. Proof. Every receipt, every court document, every bank statement, every legal filing, every payment I had made for Emily. Everything was there. I had spent nearly 20 years keeping records because I believed it was the responsible thing to do. I never imagined those records would one day be the reason I escaped a nightmare. But even after the evidence began clearing my name, I couldn't celebrate, because one question kept haunting me. What would happen to Emily? She had spent years believing I had betrayed her. If Linda had manipulated her, then Emily was not simply the person who accused me. She was also someone who had been manipulated. That didn't erase what she had done. It didn't erase the police at my door. It didn't erase the rumors. It didn't erase the sleepless nights. But it helped me understand something I had refused to see. Emily had been searching for someone to blame for the loss of her parents, and Linda had given her someone. Me. The investigators eventually confirmed what I had been hoping to hear. They could not substantiate Emily's allegations against me. There was no evidence of theft, no evidence of financial misconduct, no evidence that I had taken anything belonging to Emily. The investigation against me was effectively over. When I heard those words, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I felt empty. I had spent months terrified that my entire life could collapse because of something I hadn't done. Now the truth was finally visible. But the truth couldn't give me back those months. It couldn't repair my reputation overnight. It couldn't erase the way people had looked at me. And most painfully, it couldn't restore the relationship I once had with Emily. Then, about 2 months after the investigation ended, My phone rang late one evening. I looked at the screen, and my heart stopped. Emily was calling. For several seconds, I simply stared at her name. I could have ignored the call. Part of me wanted to. I was still hurt, still angry, still exhausted. But another part of me remembered a 7-year-old girl sitting alone in a hospital waiting room after losing both her parents. The little girl I had promised to protect. So I answered. Neither of us spoke. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Then she finally whispered, "Aunt Sarah." Those 2 words broke something inside me. For years, Emily had called me Mom. Now she was calling me Aunt Sarah. I didn't know what to say. Then I heard her crying. "I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. Those were the words I had imagined hearing for months. But when they finally came, they didn't make everything better. They made me sad. Emily told me she had reviewed the evidence from the investigation. She had seen the financial records. She had seen the documents. She had finally realized that the inheritance she believed existed had never existed. And she realized that the stories Linda told her were not facts. They were lies. Then Emily said something that I will never forget. "I think I just wanted someone to blame." I couldn't answer immediately, because deep down, I understood. She had lost her parents when she was 7. She had grown up with questions nobody could completely answer. Why did they have to die? Why did she have to become an orphan? Why did her life have to change? Those questions had lived inside her for years. And when Linda came along with simple explanations, Emily grabbed onto them. It was easier to believe someone had caused her pain than to accept that sometimes terrible things happen for no reason. Emily asked me if I could ever forgive her. I thought about the police officers on my porch. I thought about the rumors, the investigation, the sleepless nights, the way people had looked at me. I thought about everything she had said. Then I remembered that little girl, and I gave her the only answer I could honestly give. "Yes, Emily, I forgive you." She began crying harder. But forgiveness didn't mean everything was suddenly okay. It didn't mean I trusted her again. And it certainly didn't mean our relationship could return to the way it had been before. Trust had been destroyed, and rebuilding it would take much more than an apology. Before we ended the call, Emily asked if she could see me. I didn't say yes immediately. I told her I needed time, and for the first time, she respected that. Over the following weeks, Emily continued sending messages. She never pressured me. She never demanded forgiveness. She simply told me she understood if I needed space. And slowly, something inside me began to change. The anger didn't disappear, but it became quieter. I began realizing that if I allowed what happened to control the rest of my life, Linda wouldn't be the only person who had taken something from me. The betrayal had already taken enough. I wasn't going to let it take my peace too. 6 months after Emily's apology, we finally agreed to meet. And when I saw her sitting across from me, I realized that the woman in front of me was no longer the little girl I had raised. She was an adult, carrying the consequences of her choices. We talked for hours, about her parents, about my marriage, about her childhood, about Linda, about the investigation, about the lies, and finally about us. Emily cried when she told me she had found some old journals from when she was a child. In those journals, she had written about me constantly. She wrote about how safe she felt in my house, how happy she was when I attended her school events, how grateful she was that I had stayed when everyone else had disappeared. She had written about the same woman she later accused of stealing from her, and reading those words forced her to confront something painful. The woman she had accused was never the woman she had known. The villain existed only in the story Linda had created. When our conversation ended, we didn't hug immediately. We didn't pretend everything was fixed. Instead, Emily looked at me and said, "I know I destroyed something between us." I nodded. "You did." She lowered her eyes. "Can we ever build it again?" I looked at the woman I had once carried in my arms as a frightened 7-year-old, and I realized I didn't know the answer, but maybe I didn't need to know yet. Because some relationships aren't repaired in one conversation. Some wounds don't disappear after one apology. And some trust has to be earned, one small action at a time. So I told her, we can try. And that was where our second chance began. Not with a perfect reunion, not with everything magically going back to normal, but with two people finally choosing the truth over the story that had destroyed them. A few days after Emily and I agreed to try again, I thought the hardest part was finally behind us. I was wrong. Rebuilding trust was harder than I expected. There were days when Emily called and we talked for hours. Other days, I needed space. She understood. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply trying to understand me. Then one afternoon, Emily asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. Sarah, do you think Linda knew what she was doing? I went quiet. I had asked myself that question many times. I don't know, I finally said. Emily looked down. I think she did. That sentence changed the way I saw everything. Emily began telling me things I hadn't known. Linda had not simply spoken to her once or twice. She had been talking to her for years. She had repeatedly told Emily that I had taken advantage of her parents' death. She had convinced Emily that I had hidden money. She had even suggested that I had intentionally kept certain information from her. And the more Emily listened, the more convinced she became. Then Emily told me something that made my heart sink. Linda wasn't just telling me about the past, she said. She was asking about my money. I stared at her. What do you mean? She wanted to know how much I had saved, what I owned, what my plans were. She kept saying that if I recovered what my parents left me, my life would change. Suddenly, everything made sense. Linda had been presenting herself as someone fighting for Emily, but perhaps she had another reason. I asked Emily whether Linda had ever asked her to sign anything. Emily hesitated. Then she shook her head. No, but she once told me that if I ever recovered the inheritance, I should let her help me manage it. My stomach tightened. Did she ever tell you how much you were supposed to receive? Emily nodded. She said it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. I closed my eyes. That was the story that had destroyed our family. A fortune that never existed. Money that had never been there. And somehow, Linda had built an entire narrative around it. Emily looked at me. I believed her. I know. I don't know why. Because you wanted an answer. Her eyes filled with tears. And you became the answer. I didn't know what to say, because that was exactly what had happened. Linda had taken Emily's grief and given it a target. Me. But there was still one question. Why would Linda do it? We didn't have to wait long for the answer. A few weeks later, Emily received a message from Linda. It was a long message, filled with accusations and anger. But one sentence stood out. Linda told Emily that I had manipulated the investigation. Emily showed it to me. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe how far the story had gone. Sarah, she's saying the investigators are protecting you. I looked at Emily. Then what does she think would prove the truth? Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. Linda had created a story where every piece of evidence against her could be explained away. If the records proved I was innocent, the records were supposedly fake. If investigators cleared me, they were supposedly biased. If Emily remembered loving me as a child, those memories were supposedly manipulated. There was no way to win against a story like that. But Emily finally understood something. Linda wasn't trying to help her find the truth anymore. She was trying to keep control of the story. And that realization changed everything. Emily stopped responding to Linda. At first, Linda became angry. Then she became desperate. Messages came almost every day. Some were emotional, some were threatening, some were filled with guilt. But Emily stopped engaging. Then one evening, Emily called me. Sarah, I think I need to tell you everything. I sat down. What happened? She told me Linda had recently asked her to meet privately. During that meeting, Linda had insisted that Emily continue pursuing the allegations. She told Emily that backing down would mean letting me get away with everything. But Emily asked Linda a simple question. If you're so certain Sarah stole the money, where is the evidence? Linda couldn't answer. Instead, she became angry. That was the moment Emily finally saw it. Linda had spent years telling her what had happened, but whenever Emily asked for proof, there was always another explanation, another excuse, another story. Emily told me she left that meeting feeling confused, but for the first time, she wasn't confused about me, she was confused about Linda. A few days later, investigators contacted Emily. They had questions about the information she had originally provided, and this time, Emily told them the truth. She explained where the accusations came from. She gave them copies of her conversations with Linda. She showed them messages. She provided everything, and when investigators reviewed the material, they discovered something important. Several claims Emily had made were almost identical to statements Linda had previously sent her. The accusations weren't independently formed. They had been repeated until Emily believed them. That discovery changed the direction of everything. Investigators began examining Linda's involvement more closely, and then they found financial information that made the situation even more disturbing. Linda had been in serious financial trouble. She had debts. She had creditors contacting her. She had been looking for ways to improve her financial situation. And suddenly, investigators understood why Emily's supposed inheritance had become so important. It wasn't just about the past. It was about money that Linda believed could exist in the future. Money that might never have belonged to Emily at all. The more investigators looked, the more inconsistencies they found. Linda's story changed. Dates didn't match. Claims contradicted official records. And the supposed inheritance she had described simply wasn't there. There was no hidden fortune, no secret account, no stolen money, nothing. Eventually, investigators reached their conclusion. There was no evidence that I had committed financial misconduct. No evidence that I had stolen from Emily. No evidence that I had hidden an inheritance. The allegations against me could not be substantiated. When I heard those words, I didn't celebrate. I just closed my eyes. For months, I had been afraid that my life could be destroyed by something I never did. Now, finally, the truth was out. But the truth didn't erase everything. My reputation had been damaged. My relationships had changed. My peace had disappeared. And my relationship with Emily had been shattered. Still, there was one thing I knew. I had survived it. I hadn't allowed the accusations to turn me into someone I wasn't. I hadn't retaliated. I hadn't tried to destroy Emily. I had simply kept telling the truth. And sometimes, the truth takes longer to arrive. But eventually, it arrives. Months later, Emily and I sat together again. This time, there was no investigation, no accusations, no folders filled with documents, just the two of us. She looked at me and said, "I don't expect you to forget. I won't. I don't expect you to trust me immediately. I can't." She nodded. Then she whispered, "But I want to earn it." I looked at her for a long moment. The little girl I had raised was gone, but the woman sitting in front of me was finally taking responsibility for what she had done. And maybe that was where healing truly began. Not with forgetting, not with pretending, but with accountability. I reached across the table and took her hand. Then start there. And for the first time in years, Emily smiled through her tears. We still had a long way to go, but at least we were finally walking in the same direction. A year passed after Emily and I decided to try again. It wasn't perfect. There were still difficult moments. There were still memories we didn't know how to talk about. But slowly, things changed. Emily stopped trying to erase what happened. Instead, she began taking responsibility for it. She apologized, without expecting anything in return. She checked on me. She showed up when she said she would, and little by little, I began trusting her again. Not the way I trusted her when she was 7, not blindly. This time, it was a different kind of trust, one built slowly, carefully, and honestly. Then one Sunday afternoon, Emily came to my house carrying something. She placed a small box on the table. "What's that?" I asked. She opened it. Inside were photographs, pictures from her childhood, her parents, her first day of school, her birthday parties, Christmas mornings. And then I saw one that made my chest tighten. It was a picture of Emily and me in front of the house. She was maybe 8 years old. She was smiling so widely that her eyes were almost closed. I remembered that day. She had just learned how to ride a bicycle. She had fallen several times, scraped her knee, cried, and then gotten back up. I smiled. "You kept this?" Emily nodded. "I kept everything." Then she pulled out something else, a small notebook, my childhood journal. I looked at her. "You still have it?" "Yes." She opened it carefully. Then she read something she had written years ago. It was about me, about how I had stayed beside her when she was scared, about how I made her pancakes on Saturday mornings, about how I waited outside her school whenever she was nervous, about how she believed I could fix anything. Emily stopped reading. Her eyes filled with tears. "I used to think you could fix everything." I swallowed hard. "I wish I could have." She shook her head. "You did fix things. You just couldn't fix what happened to my parents." That sentence stayed with me, because maybe that had always been the problem. Emily had spent years looking for someone who could explain why her parents died, and when nobody could give her an answer, she found one herself. But grief doesn't always have an explanation. Sometimes tragedy is simply tragedy, and blaming someone doesn't change what happened. I reached across the table. Emily took my hand. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry I made you feel like you weren't my mother." I looked at her. "You were my daughter, Emily. You still are in the ways that matter." She began crying. So did I. But this time, the tears didn't feel like the tears I had cried before. These were different. They felt like release, like finally putting down something heavy. Over time, Emily and I created new traditions. We had Sunday lunches. We celebrated birthdays together. Sometimes we watched old movies. Sometimes we talked about her parents. And sometimes we talked about nothing important at all. That was the part I treasured most. Normal conversations. Simple moments. The things we once took for granted. Linda eventually disappeared from our lives. Emily stopped communicating with her. I never asked her to. That was her decision. And I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Linda to suffer. I didn't need the world to punish her. I had spent enough time watching my life revolve around what she had done. I wanted my life back, and I finally understood something. Sometimes closure isn't seeing the person who hurt you punished. Sometimes closure is reaching a point where what they did no longer controls your happiness. Years later, I still remember that morning. The morning 2 police officers stood on my porch. The morning Emily stood behind them and accused me of something I never did. I remember the fear, the humiliation, the confusion, the heartbreak. But I also remember what happened afterward. The truth came out. The lies collapsed. And somehow, after everything, Emily and I found a way forward. Our relationship was never exactly what it had been. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be. Because trust that has been broken doesn't return as the same thing. It becomes something new, something more deliberate, something both people choose every day. Today, when I look at Emily, I don't see the woman who once accused me. I see the little girl I promised to protect. But I also see the adult woman who learned from her mistake. And that distinction matters. Because forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the betrayal never happened. It means refusing to let the betrayal become the rest of your life. I learned that love can survive pain, but love without boundaries can destroy you. I learned that forgiveness can be given without immediately giving back trust. And most importantly, I learned that sometimes the people we love hurt us in ways we never imagined. What matters is what they do after the truth comes out. Do they deny it? Do they blame someone else? Or do they take responsibility and change? Emily chose responsibility, and because she did, we were given something I never thought we'd have again. A second chance. Not the old relationship. A new one. One built on honesty. One built on boundaries. one built on the understanding that neither of us would ever take the other for granted again. If there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this. Don't allow someone else's lies to make you doubt the truth you know about yourself. And don't allow betrayal to turn your heart into a prison. Protect yourself. Set boundaries. Keep your evidence. But when the truth finally comes out, give yourself permission to heal. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. Sometimes it's getting your peace back. And that was what I finally got. My peace, my life, and, against all odds, my daughter back. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Nenya Folk Tales, where every story teaches us something about betrayal, karma, love, and life. And remember, I'll see you in the next story.